Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's broadcast of Asymmetric Habits. And I am here with my good friend Jonathan Pishner, owner of Apex Counseling. How long have you been doing that, by the way?
Just about as long as you've been running Viking, but right at 10
Yeah,
years.
just question I had there about over a decade of experience, and then myself, Jerry Hanley, a strength and conditioning coach who's owner of Viking Performance Training, and so we've been here bringing this podcast to you for a few years now. And today's topic on asymmetric habits is how to make sure you actually get rest from your restful activity. And one thing I'll tell you right now, to listeners, is you're going to find out, probably to no surprise from your own experience, that this is not as easy as it seems to make happen. I did not tell JP this, but ironically, so I woke up to this morning and then I took the trash out and tried to get my morning started and eventually gave up and took a 30-minute nap on the couch before this to, to make sure that I would actually have a better chance at having a high quality brain like for this podcast. And I thought when I looked down when was starting this live feed right here and saw the topic, I was like, wow, how perfect. Like so often it is. So all right, my man. So talk to us real quick. Why is this such a hard thing for people to do and why is it so important?
Well, I'm going to try and shorten it because I could go on for about 2 or 3 hours about how our culture handles this badly, and that's why individually we handle it badly. But if I try and cliff notes it as best I can, uh, we love to believe that we should be able to have infinite mental and emotional capacity to handle anything. And we hate to believe that we actually need to take rest. And on top of that, we hate to believe that we actually need to put thought into that and that you actually need to put some care into how you design your rest and recovery. Uh, the only people that I talk to that like grasp this relatively rapidly, and even then it takes a little work, is athletes, because physically they understand how desperately they need rest and recovery and how it's part of a training regimen. So it's not quite as tough of a sell for them to be like, oh yeah, you actually got to do that mentally and emotionally too. But for most people who don't have to think in that way, the first person who has ever suggested to them that rest is important might be me, and it might be when they're 40 or 50 years old.
Hmm. Wow.
So yeah, we do a bad job of this as a society all the way around. So I have a lot of empathy whenever I'm talking to somebody about this and about how to actually get rest. And when they're like completely clueless, I'm like, yeah, of course you're clueless because you've been trained badly from the jump. And so yeah, that's why this is so desperately important, because we are not trained well in this to start, and then we develop bad habits, and then it just becomes a mess. And then by the time most people start thinking about this, they've really dug themselves a hole, and then climbing out of it is quite a challenge.
Yes, it is. Indeed, it is. It's really interesting to me you say that. You sometimes like you telling people is the first time they've ever heard it. And it made me think it's actually interesting that, yeah, I'm not surprised at all that you say, athletes are usually some of the people that at least get the idea a little bit better, a little bit faster. And because I've lived in a I've lived in I don't know what the word would be for it, but a like opposites dichotomy of this for 20 years now. Is because yeah, I've been working with athletes for over 20 years, and it's always a part of the planning process from the very beginning to make sure that they know to take care of themselves, to rest, to go and recover when the workout is done. So acute rest and just doing the right things to recover, but then also longer in planned rest, like when we give them lighter weeks to deload weeks that have come up before, and even entire weeks off. Like I said, it's all part of the process. Even times of the year where the whole idea is okay, like these times of the year will go a little bit easier, let them rest and recover and prepare more for the when we can go harder and really get that growth. And at the exact same time as that is everything we've been focusing on, the life of a strength and conditioning coach in college, so when I was in my 20s And but then again, also the likelihood or the reality sometimes of opening your own business in my 30s, neither one of them ever really says anything about stopping to rest. And it's just go, 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 work 70 hours. You worked 70, great. Now work 100 hours a week. Like, so two completely different paths walking side by side with each other. So
Mhm.
it's absurd. It really is
Yeah,
looking
it
at how
really
that happens.
is.
Yeah, and I think, like, that's actually, I think, gonna be probably part of, a good part of this message for people is, like I said, with society, message and what we see, but also how hard it is for people to, like, think about it and actually turn it on themselves. I feel like this is one of these, phenomena that people tend to think of, like, for some reason, they're different than everybody else.
Yes, yes, we like to view ourselves as invincible and having infinite capacity in the mental and emotional realms because we can't see that. Like we can see if a muscle gets injured. It's harder to see when the brain needs rest.
Mhm.
And this can go into like our first piece of this. I'm going to talk about how people are badly trained. You might know this because you're a nerd, but the regulatory structure in the brain, the neocortex, that's what lets you functionally have discipline. It's what lets you regulate yourself and do something you don't want to do, and it lets you kind of keep your emotions in check, repress them if necessary, if they're not the right thing to experience right then. Those kind of things. Uh, what do we do to 8-year olds? We send them to a building, tell them to sit still and focus for 8 hours, and we imagine that they should be able to do this with their massively underdeveloped neocortex, and we give them an adult level task that even most adults couldn't do. Most adults can't sit still and focus for 8 hours, let alone 8-year olds. Uh, so, right there is where the training starts. We're
Mhm.
already telling little people, little human beings, that they should be able to do this. And then we never stop. We never stop that message. Uh, and then we get all shocked and shaken as parents and adults and teachers and whatever other roles adults play in children's lives when, why can't you sit still? As if they don't have a massively underdeveloped regulatory structure of their brain. Uh, but then think about how that messaging carries over. How many adults have I talked to who like can't focus on a task at work, but instead of saying, perhaps I need a break, they tell themselves how they are stupid and crap and undisciplined and terrible and not worthless. And so you can see how that training ferments and strengthens over time. So today will be about like the baby steps of starting to untrain that and to start trying to do something a little differently and some basic steps on how to like start moving in the right direction.
Mm. That's gonna be really good, and I had that conversation at least 3 times in the last 2 days about kids going to school and having to sit down for just 8 hours a day. Like I said, it probably is with school coming up, that's there. But like actually one of the coaches at the gym, even I don't even remember how it came up, but just yesterday, I think it was, we were talking about that. And she said, she's younger, she's like 24, you know, and she said, yeah, like the longer I go now, actually being out of school, I'm finally starting to realize how ridiculous that is, that kids just go and are told to sit for 7, 8 hours. And like you said, like it really is training, like, for that, whether it's what, like, it's not the point of this podcast to go into how purposeful that is or what their end game is, anything like that. But nevertheless, that is conditioning. Like that's training, just like you said. And so everybody going through public school at some point, like that's just the way it is. So everybody exits public school with that thought that like whether they enjoyed it or not,
Mhm.
notwithstanding that they just think that that's the way it is. And
Yeah.
you completely see why they would think that it would be like, because I also know that that humans, have we question ourselves a lot, especially when we struggle to do something that we did before, you know, and I feel like that's one of them. So like when we do start getting out, whether it's in the professional world or whether it's doing trying to do our own thing with entrepreneurship or just simply a career, and like you said, like we're not able to say like sit there and just focus on one task or do one thing with a super steady regimented um schedule, or with the goals, the tasks we hit. If we do that, but then we struggle to work more at home, which is just adult homework,
Mhm.
then it's like, wow, like I was able to do this in school, I was able to do this in college. Why am I struggling so much right now? Like I said, yeah, it becomes way more of a I am at fault. I am the one who is lacking here. Like like what is wrong with me? Why can't I do this? Rather than like, wow, was this ever healthy from the beginning? What can
Yep.
we do to do better here?
So let's start fixing some stuff. Uh, First off, rest is almost too simple of a word for this, uh, because that conjures up the certain images that don't always meet the definition. So let's define our term a little bit better. Uh, Rest, the way we're going to talk about it, is not just relaxation. Rest is figuring out how to properly recharge both our energy and our abilities. That is a good working definition for how I utilize this with people, because some people aren't going to get any benefit out of a nap because it doesn't recharge the energy or abilities that they happen to need. Therefore, that's not the right type of rest. So, uh, we're going to approach the idea of rest really as ability management and energy management, and then that actually creates some actionability for some of this, because let's go with the school example again. uh, I went to a conference last week and presented, but I also took a couple classes because I have to take X number of education hours to maintain my license. So I sat through some classes. All of them were pretty okay. They were all 90 minutes. About 30 minutes into one of them, my ability to focus was just wearing out because I'd already taught a class. Now I'm taking a class. So I ended up about 30 minutes in, getting up, went to the bathroom, didn't really feel like I was ready to sit back down and listen. So I just kind of wandered around the building for about 10 minutes. And then I went back to class because I could feel my ability to focus starting to recharge. I just kind of wandered outside and just looked around at some stuff and just basically did nothing. Then went back and I was able to focus for, I'm pretty sure, the rest of the class. But what I was doing in the background is I was thinking, okay, I can't keep following these words. I got to get up and do something because I could feel myself both drifting mentally and kind of like doing the sleep nod. Uh, and so all I did was I just kind of rested that part of my brain. Didn't need much. But what I couldn't do, and spoiler alert, you're going to hear me bitch about this several times today, probably. What I didn't do is I didn't pull this thing out, my phone, and start scrolling, because if I did that, that's actually working the same muscle I was trying to rest. So
Okay.
I didn't want to work that muscle. I wanted to let it rest. So I knew not to pull my phone out. I knew to just like basically wander and not focus on anything. And that muscle got rested in about 10 minutes and went back. Now, most people wouldn't have thought to do that because since today is probably the first day anybody's hearing the idea of ability management, and I was working on the ability to focus, they wouldn't have thought to do that. And it'll probably take a lot of people a lot of practice to start figuring out, okay, what are the abilities I need to rest? What are the abilities I'm trying to like recover here? So that's going to be the main challenge. But the first key unlock is starting to think in terms of ability and energy management. What am I trying to rejuvenate right here in this moment? That's key unlock number one.
That is way more, not complex, but that is more difficult than it sounds. That is one of those that is very simple, but doing it. But like, hey, like how many times have we talked about in this podcast trial and error, trial and error in just finding out what works best for you. And
Mhm.
that's exactly what you're talking about here. And what you said makes total sense, especially, I mean, it just, because think of like, you know, there's times that we can't do anything like you said mentally. But by the way, the first image I had when you mentioned walking around for a few minutes before going back in the room was how that is not allowed in school. I'm really not trying to like rag on
Yes.
schools here, but there are a lot of things that it could be done better. So
Yeah, but it's going to happen. We're going to end up ragging on school a little bit.
yeah, so it's like again, like it's like, hey, like no wandering the hallways, stuff like that. Um, and I know that's actually a part of like IEPs or something for some students is like, if they need a break, let them go take a break.
Yeah, and,
But
and it
anyway,
can't be unsupervised. I get it. I'm not going to go to that level and be like, you should let them do this. But I mean,
right,
it's
yeah,
just a
yeah, there's tons of
thing.
nuances. It's a whole system thing. But then also, okay, like there's times we need a mental break. There's times that we can't feel like mentally productive to work on something. But then there's times when it's more of a physical thing, like wow, like I feel good, like, but I'm just physically tired and don't want to go do anything. And so part of this kind of in a long term is not just realizing, what type of rest you need, but also doing like, like to the best of your ability, actually kind of like making your own like schedule slash routine. I don't even mean any of those, but which ones are you kind of just more attuned for at certain times? Like we all have times of the day that we feel better mentally. We all have
Mhm.
times of the day that we feel better physically. So, to the best that we can we schedule, physical things, whether it's working out, exercise, manual labor, when we feel more like physically energetic? Can we schedule our more important work tasks when we feel more creative and productive? Can we do those things to from like basically from that end up being less tired and less fatigued, which could then help the overall recovery because you drain your tank less. And like that in combination with realizing which ones you need, what will actually help you rest like for each task or each yeah, I'm struggling to come up with the word that we're talking about with which type of energy activation you need. um, is all part of like a successful regiment, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. And once people get to a certain level, that's one of the things to do is start figuring out like, oh, I see. I need to do my creative work at this time in the day, and I need to do my drudgery work at this time of the day, but only for this amount of time, and and on and on and on.
Mhm.
And in fact, just to speak on that for a moment, like what I've found is I actually have to skillfully time my drudgery work in the day so that I didn't do a long block of it right before leaving. Because what I started to notice is ability and energy management wise, uh, if I overexpended on drudgery right before leaving work, I felt terrible. I felt like I didn't get enough done. I mean, just all sorts of just dysregulation. And what I figured out was if I do a fairly long block of drudgery work in the day, but I make sure the last hour, hour and a half is, if I can qualify it as important work or like, growth work or something, that seems to mitigate that. So that as you get better at it, what you'll do is start figuring out the schedule for it. But the very first part is figuring out what are the key categories.
Yeah.
And there is at least a little bit of this that's generalizable that's worth talking about. Even though within each person there's going to be some nuance. So if you're listening to this, don't imagine that I'm giving you like the final copy. This is like a rough draft to go off of, then take it and run with it. But you'll have things like your ability to regulate your focus. That's going to be a muscle that needs rested. Decision making. 100% decision making is a
Yes.
muscle. I mean, most entrepreneurs know the story of Mark Zuckerberg and only having one outfit, so he preserves his decision making ability. Um, that's an extreme example, but a valid one. Decision making will be something that a person needs to rest. Let me think, what else will there be? Oh, emotional regulation. The more you have to regulate your emotions, the more that will need rested. Think your frontline retail workers.
Ooh.
Anytime I hear of a frontline retail worker blowing up on a customer and just losing their mind, what I know is that the thing that caused that was 20 customers ago, and they didn't get the proper chance to rest their emotional regulation muscle, and then some little thing happened and they went nuts. Or the same thing in the opposite direction. Anytime I see somebody like yelling at the barista at Starbucks, I know it's not that happened. I know that it was like, their kid was screaming all morning, and like, maybe they were fighting with their spouse and who knows what. And just the last little thing happened, they blew up. You absolutely have to find ways to rest the emotional regulation portion of your brain. Um, Anything that's related to certain skill sets like math, verbal ability, a lot of times those will need rested. So you can take these and you can kind of like subdivide them a lot depending on what you experience in a day, but that's going to be some of them. And then of course your physical body. Your physical body needs rest. You do need sleep, in spite of what school and college and entrepreneurship will train you to believe. You actually do need sleep. Most people 5 to 8 hours, but there's individual differences. And you need ways to recover beyond just sleep. So some people need to actually do like other physically rejuvenative things. There's everything from massage to cold therapy to all sorts of physically rejuvenating things. So there's categories upon categories. Most people will need to attend to 3 or 4 of them. Most people are not going to need all of those. And frankly, there's a lot of people that, I mean, even if they just focused on one and started really hammering on it, would be able to get a lot of rest and rejuvenation. So that's step 2, is like figuring out what are the places where you actually need rest. And then here in a second, we'll move on to like, how do you get that? What are the activities that get that?
I'm not gonna lie, man. I have so many like notes and directions to go, and they can't possibly be in any categorized in any one order. Um, so okay, so one thing I think we really need to touch on again, because it's so big, easy to like hear, but not really comprehend the first time around, is how, for like early on we mentioned, these are not things that we can just do by choice infinitely. Like you said, like emotionally like particularly the mental ones. We can't simply be in a good mood or act in a good mood, or like our employees, like in the case of like, okay, that retail worker, like their managers can't simply expect their workers to just constantly be in a good mood 100% of the time, purely by like, hey, this is what you need to do. Like you said, like they need they need proper brain fuel. And I mean, yeah, like from the beginning, early on, like it is, definitely to an extent the employees' responsibility themselves, of course. But you
Mhm.
can't just simply give them, yeah, like unending shifts, the hardest shifts of the day, not give them breaks. Like, yeah, there's a lot that goes to that. So you can't simply just willpower it. And that goes for the self too. Just like you're saying, like when it comes to decision making, to productive work, to growth work, to doing the drudgery at home, whatever it is. They said, like, we are not equipped to just simply willpower our way through that every day, like every day, week on end, month on end, forever. Like that is real, and we really can't get that point enough. Because I said there are people out there still who just are going to hear that and still think that they can, or like that they should be able to. But it's like, no, seriously, really, you cannot go that way the entire time. You can fake it for a really long time, but you can't really push that and keep that going. Um, Now, something that I think like there's so many different ways to like to look at it. It's so many different types of these like energy. One way like one pattern that I would say, and this could just be the way my brain works. So sorry if it is, but there's kind of a hierarchy of basically finer, subtle points down to more generalized ones in almost each one. And basically, what I'm saying is that in each case, the one that takes more exactness is almost always going to get fatigued first and needs recovery sooner. So like your higher end decisions, or physically speaking, like dexterity, um, speed, agility, and power for an athlete, all those things fatigue first and need recovery first. Like you can stay strong and you can continue like endurance training longer, but if you're like a speed athlete, if you're a power and explosive athlete, you need to recover. You need to rest sooner because those physical characteristics actually degrade faster. They come
Mhm.
down faster. And I see the same type of thing when it comes to the emotional regulation, when it comes to the decision making. I said like the more intense those things are, or just the more important they are, I think it would actually be better to think like, okay, like I need to just basically just an awareness that like, okay, if I'm going into these situations, I need to make like it's really important for me to make sure that I'm like on top of my game or feeling good here. It might be less important when I'm doing something else. Like, okay, like here's an example. All right. We'll look at purchasing. Like, okay, we all like, like we've talked before how part of the decision making philosophy, or like the people who understand that and actually use it, are grocery stores. They put those impulse buys right near the like the checkout areas where like people have already made tons of decisions what to put in their cart. Willpower's down and they impulsively grab those snacks that increases the bottom line for the grocery stores, and of course aren't necessarily the healthiest either. So that's
Yep,
one.
that's a very good point to bring up here. Yeah.
Yeah, like that's one example of like the general decision making. But if we also want to, be comparative here, it's probably like, while that is a good lifestyle thing to notice and try to get better to at fixing, to some degree, is what's probably more important is say like buying a house. So you don't want to go into like learning about a house or meetings with real estate agents, or like especially if deals or like offers have actually been made, when you're kind of like when you're tired and you just don't have that decision making capacity to actually think of is like, is this a good deal, can I get more, like is it like again, is somebody being ripped off here, like you want to be
Ooh,
your
ooh, ooh,
best.
pause right there for a second. Let me ask you a question because this goes into exactly what you're saying. Uh, when you bought your house, uh, the when I bought mine, I can't remember how much the closing cost was, however many thousands of dollars. It was the first time I'd ever written a check that big. I was done for the day. After we signed those papers and I handed over that check, I had to go lay down. Like, did you have a similar experience?
Oh man, I honestly don't remember for the house, but I know that I definitely did when it came to writing the like my first new rent check for the gym.
Oh yeah, yeah. Because like handing over a check that big, I mean, like it was just
And
the
actually,
physical act of like handing it, but that expended so much energy because like I'd put so much mental thought into this. Like just the act of doing that expended so much energy for me. I was done for the day. I had to go lay down. Like I mean, I couldn't even like go celebrate getting a house because I was just so wiped.
you literally just solved my question that I had for you before this. Like
Okay.
before this, I said, I was like, I don't know why I've been so tired for like a day and a half. And I just realized it because it's like, it wasn't that like for me, um, like, yeah, like I think it was yesterday or 2 nights ago. So almost just in that same time frame. There is a lot of times, like almost every month, there's one day that is when I sit down and I write the rent check. I write I enter a payroll, like a full payroll. I pay the estimate. I pay the payroll taxes for the month, and in one day I'll spend like $13,000 or something, or like half the budget for the month in one day on just lease, bills, taxes, payroll, like over half the overhead in one day.
Mhm.
And I hate it naturally. They're all good things, of course, but seeing that it's like, oh, this sucks. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm exhausted after that. It's like, and that happens, like I said, like almost every month. But I said, yeah, that was a day and a half ago, and yeah, I remember like being like I couldn't do anything the rest of the day.
Yeah.
It came from that.
So energy and ability management, make that the last thing you do that day.
Really, yeah, that needs exactly is exactly what I need to do. Um, yeah, so like to finish that one off, like, I mean, did that make sense otherwise about like kind of the finer points in the generalization?
Yeah. Although let me invite the listening audience. If you don't want to complicate it like that, don't do that. Jerry has a love of systems and processes. And if that's the way your brain works, absolutely like make this a very complicated flow chart. Uh, and if it works for you that way, then hell with it. It works that way. But if you go the opposite direction, just pick one thing and forget the rest.
Yep. Now, and then something else based on what you mentioned was, find like learning the things that actually help you recover. And like you said, they're not all simply sleep or take time off and rest that way, which I think that was great that from the early on you tackled that. Yeah, because rest brings to mind sitting down and resting. like
Yeah.
like automatic, which is great, which is good. But like you said, like that is by no means a complete picture of actual recovery to like the individual. Like I said, based on just the different things that's
Yeah.
tiring us out.
And let me tell a story as we move into this because this is really good because it shows the kind of like details you want to think about. I knew it was time to have the type of rest of sit down and watch TV, and that is a type of rest I get a lot out of when it's the right time. So sat down and we're like, oh man, let's go ahead and start House of Dragon. New season's out. Watched the first episode of House of Dragon. Got done with it. Uh, People die at the end in a pretty brutal way. And after that episode was over, I was like, I don't feel rejuvenated after watching this. I don't know if I'm going to watch this show because I like the first season. Is all right. Yeah, I watched the first episode. I'm like, yeah, I don't think this is restful. I don't think I'm going to get any rejuvenation out of this. And I watched another episode since. And I know why that is because, like, as a trauma therapist, I deal all day with all of the horrible things
Mm.
human beings can do to one another. And so that doesn't make much sense for me to then watch that as some sort of rest activity. Uh, so now it's like, well, okay, we're not going to watch House of Dragon. When it's TV watching time, I'm going to pick something else. Uh, so it's good to know that like there's some nuance. Sitting down and watching TV isn't necessarily just sitting down and watching TV. You might actually need to put some thought into, do I feel rested afterwards? If not, why? How do I change this going forward?
I was laughing because there's just so much of this that's related that's immediately relatable. That is exactly what Ashley and I do when it comes to watching like TV at night or something like that. It says coming through and like yeah, the things that I may be interested in watching a lot of times, like specifically, like just like you said, are a lot of times going to be too intense for her recovery and recharge button. So
Mhm.
the really high like action, or if it's like yeah, like more violent action, horror based or something like that, then those are usually based for me to watch on like say if she's out of town or something like that, or like I'm like, you know, solo time, not because she doesn't like it, but yeah, because when it's like relax, the day is done and unwind time, at that point she doesn't want to watch it.
Yeah, good. That's good for her to know.
Yep. So I on a recent like I had like earlier this year decided to catch like to kick up The Walking Dead, for example. And I couldn't even remember where I'd left off anyway. So did that, but like when she was gone this past trip, I basically like ended up binging an entire season and then some at some point in the middle because I was like, okay, like this is gonna be like a month before I can do this again. And it just like I said, was entertaining enough to keep it going. And it was at a
Mhm.
point in time when I actually felt like I needed some just shut off time, period. So hence that's what it turned into.
Yeah.
But yeah, like
And let me play off that for a second because Walking Dead was not restful to me, although it was for a different reason. Uh, we watched the first episode, and the first episode follows the sheriff guy whose name I can't recall. And he was so bad at managing a crisis situation, I couldn't like not yell at him in my head. But because if it had been like a grocery store clerk or something, I would have been like, fine. But the fact that here is like this crisis trained first responder who can't like get it together and act like he knows what to do in a crisis. All I was doing the entire time was yelling at him in my head. And so I was like, well, okay, this is not, this would be a fun drinking game, but this is not a restful, like, let me just sit down and watch this show.
Well, he does get better. He's awesome eventually, but I can tell he's like that. Just that first, I actually remember that pure shock. Plus, and again, at risk of hijacking yet another podcast, there's always that question of like, have these people never watched a zombie movie?
I heard a great line about that. It is unreasonable to expect a character to understand what genre they are in.
Oh,
and I was like, oh, that's a good line.
That sounds like life. So okay, back to the things that can actually help you recover. Since we talked about pure rest and then like TV, there are some things like I'd be curious to know what kind of causes this, because there's also some things where the activity itself helps you recover a little, like rest a little bit. For example, is feeling, if you have a lot of chronic fatigue or tiredness, exercise can help you basically feel re-energized and refreshed. It can be like the picker upper. It can wake you up. And there's a lot of evidence and research out there that might surprise some people, how getting, closer to nature or simply exposing yourself to nature is also something that actually automatically refreshes you. So there is a lot of this that comes down to what we've adapted to from evolution. Like, like we spent thousands of years outside most of the time, and also during the normal daylight rhythm. So a lot of those things like being active, getting blood flow and just a natural like chemicals in your body released from that, sunlight exposure, literally touching grass, like with your, like, so there's actually real life science that supports things like grounding like that. How those things can actually help regulate and energize your body. So if you are in a position where, your routine has knocked you out of that a lot, or it might be harder. Like, if you're in a concrete jungle living in the city, like, it might be a little harder for you to go get actual sunlight or some exposure to nature. But those are things that can help as well. So like you said, it's not pure rest. That's one that biologically helps.
Well, and one of the things you're getting into now, which is the good part of this, that people have to think about as they get more advanced, is the calculus of rest. So for example, let's do the exercise thing. A lot of times people with any sorts of chronic conditions, they actually get long-term rejuvenation from exercise, but short-term it's extremely taxing.
Yes.
And so then the thing you're wrestling with is, okay, if I do my exercise today, do I have enough left in the tank where the short-term detriment I'm going to experience over that is balanced by the long-term benefit? Or is this a moment where I clearly just need the short term just to gas up for the next day, and I'm going to take this one time and skip 2% of my long-term benefit? That's a level of question that starts to become complicated very, very quickly. And the more complicated it becomes, the more individual it becomes, and the harder it is to give generalized advice around it, other than to be aware of the calculus. Because, how am I going to look at somebody with, zero energy and say, you must do this thing with long-term benefit? That's a pretty heavy ask. But the more people are at least aware of understanding what things do they need energy wise and how to balance the calculus. You see this a lot with parents. A lot of parents have extremely limited time, so they got to squeeze every drop of juice out of whatever their restful activity is. And so they often end up having to select, okay, I desperately need to see people. I need some kind of adult social interaction. But I also know that my body's starting to feel very bad. So do I prioritize social interaction or do I prioritize go to the gym? And that becomes difficult because then, of course, the thing that you would hope to do is just like, okay, let me pick social this time, gym next time. But of course, that's not always the reality of people's lives. So the thing I would encourage people to think about is as you start working through this problem, you will have to think more complexly, especially the more difficult the more difficulty you have in the way your life is laid out. You'll have a lot more complex questions to answer. If you're not ready to answer those, go to the most complicated part you're okay to solve that part and leave the complicated stuff for 2 months from now when you have a little better handle on how to get rest and rejuvenation. Because what a lot of people will sadly do is they'll try to optimize immediately. And I know you've done this. I've never asked you directly, but I know you've done this. I know you've created a D&D character and you're already imagining what they're like at level 20 while you're creating the level 1 character.
Yeah, who doesn't?
Yeah, see, I knew it.
Hey, let me show you my special. I bought like 20 sheets of the D&D stamps, by the way.
Oh God, of course you did. But so for the people listening, don't try and craft like the fully optimized version. Just do stuff that is going to result in some flavor of rest and rejuvenation. Develop the system as you go. You will not create an optimized system right out of the gate. Please don't try. I have never yet spoken to a single person who has done it. Even if you buy an optimized system from somebody else, you will still have to tool it to your where you're at. So just do stuff, but know that the complicated stuff is coming. You'll have some decisions to make and be ready to kind of like face that and make tough choices around what to rejuvenate and when.
Right before we go into like some bullet point things that people can use to improve their rest, this came in maybe 2 minutes before you mentioned parents, and I was going to bring it up. So it's perfect. So this is well, see that this is one of our comments from earlier. I know if you can see it there. But Elizabeth Ortega says it's this topic's for me. But this one came in, and I was going to ask you about parents anyway. I'll let you read it. So,
Yes.
I
Yes. This, oh gosh. Yes, Christina, this is
for
such a
the
common
listening
struggle for parents.
for the listening audience, like when this is on the podcast, Christina writes, I rarely feel rested. I think I've been tired since the day I gave birth to my son, who is 24 years old.
Yeah. And boy, let me tell you, anyone who's a caregiver, whether that's a parent caregiver, you have a child, you're a professional caregiver like myself, or like a medical professional, like anybody who's in the position of a caregiver. One of the things we sadly do is we accidentally overspend on the people we are caring for, and man, we just really don't do a good job. And I say we because I'm guilty of it too. I've gotten much better over the last decade and a half, but that internal voice that tells me to overspend on people is still in there. Really recognizing that when we're rested, we're better caregivers is like such a hard thing in our culture because we're so trained to just overspend on other people. Uh, I was giving a talk on counselor ethics last week, and I did my best not to finger wag, but I definitely stood up there and finger wagged a little bit about how they should. And I framed it this way because we were talking about letting your own emotions get involved in a counseling session, and the more you don't get proper rest, the more at risk you are of that because of prefrontal cortex. And I kind of had a little bit of a finger wagging moment when I basically said, it is your ethical responsibility as a counselor to take care of yourself, because if you are not taking care of yourself, by definition, you can't give as good care to your clients. And so it is your ethical responsibility to take care of yourself. there was some people in the audience, as I was watching, like this look of relief that just like washed over their face. Like, oh, I have permission to take care of me. Not only do I have permission, but like it actually helps other people. Uh, and again, I could tell some of these people been in the field 10 years, and the look on some of those faces, I could tell it was the first time it ever been brought up to them. They're like, yeah, you
Wow.
become a better caregiver if you take care of you and if you figure out your rest. But I mean, that's the struggle with caregivers is we oftentimes have very little time, so we got to squeeze every drop out of rest, and we
Mhm.
really gotta like optimize our system as best we can over the course of time, and that's a real struggle. So I'll get
It
off
can
my
very
soapbox about
easily
that, but yes, Christina's right.
yeah, it can very easily become a sacrificial role, like, in your mind, and especially if you also, like, let other people kinda push it that way. Like, if like, it can very easily become the, like, "Oh, like, I'm the only person doing any of this, so I can't think of myself." And, yeah, like, that's a very hard battle that has to be, basically, like, internally waged to
Yeah.
like make those decisions for yourself or maybe even stand up for yourself so that you can get there and then like you said like step back into the caregiving role even better.
You've heard my heart surgeon example about this, right?
I don't think so.
No? Oh God, I'll say it enough. I'm amazed I haven't said it in front of you. Because I'll pitch this when I talk to clients about this very thing. Whenever self care makes you a better caretaker. I mean, and it's a topic near to my heart because the likelihood is medically I'll probably have to have heart surgery before I die just because of my genetics. But if I got a choice between two heart doctors, somebody's going to do my open heart surgery, and I've got a choice between two people. Now I can choose the guy who's been working 80 hours a week, never sees his kids, always stressed out, has to way overuse caffeine and nicotine just to keep it together.
Mhm.
Or I can see the dude who does, 6 hours a day. He just got back from Cabo. He's well rested. He gets to hang out with his family on weekends, plays golf on Fridays. Which person do I want doing my surgery?
Mhm.
Like, I
Indeed.
mean, I mean, it's not even a question, is it? Like, I don't want overstressed guy doing my surgery. He's going to screw something up.
So
I want well rested guy
that's a
doing
good
my
one.
surgery.
Um the thing is one of the bullet points I had here was caffeine, and you mentioned it there. And I feel like it is definitely worth mentioning that caffeine in general slash any stimulants are definitely one part of this problem. Again, because it allows us to extend to some degree either physical or mental energy or both in doing things, and that's not like an infinite hack. And trust it from somebody who's had enough caffeine, where if there was an infinite hack, they would know. Um,
Word.
like, and so eventually, you still need to actually like manage your rest and recovery. And like I said, it's funny because like one of those memes that I've seen shared a million times in just the last week, like it must be new, is quote like caffeine's not enough anymore. I need to just bite into a power line or something. And it's like I mean, that also shows like how it's all this is like all this is most people, not just some people. But again, like realizing that okay, like it's a pick me up, it helps, but they said it's only going to mask it, it's only going to extend it. It might help you basically avoid some speed bumps, but you still got a long way to go on the road. Like,
Yeah, yeah. Using performance enhancing drugs is, I'm not against that a little bit. I still do my 2-3 cups a day. But yeah, you're absolutely right. You can only squeeze so much out of that to make up for your lack of rest.
yeah. Okay, so some bullet point specifics I want to hear is like, okay, what's some advice to help people get like actually get the rest and recovery that they need, recharge themselves during weekends or days off?
Okay, so letting yourself acknowledge what you need is step one. So for a long time, Saturdays has been my recovery day. I do my jujitsu class in the morning, but other than that, in general, I treat Saturdays as a day where I just do whatever I need. And last Saturday, as a matter of fact, I even skipped class. I got up, I ate, I went back to bed. I
Ooh.
got up, moved to the couch, slept on the couch, put the TV on. Got up, ate, went back to sleeping on the couch. I really didn't actually start moving around properly until about 5 or 6 p.m. Uh, and that was just an acknowledgement of like, wow, okay, clearly I just need to sleep, and did a lot of it. But what a lot of people will do accidentally, and this goes back to our cultural messages, is they will treat the weekend as the time to get the other things done that they didn't get done this week, which I mean, and sometimes that's necessary. Yeah. So there you go. Everybody, the voice is in my head. I force myself to rest properly, but the voice is still in my head. And step one is just acknowledging what do you actually need. Like I've worked with half a dozen clients who we even had to like talk about their athletics and stuff because mentally and emotionally, what they needed was to not be in a caloric deficit.
Mm.
Uh, like I had, I work with a couple of combat athletes, like MMA fighters and wrestlers and stuff, and they're doing their weight cut. And I'm like, well, look, I mean, you got a choice. Like, you can either be emotionally regulated or you can do your weight cut. Like, really, realistically, you can't do both right now. So I'll support you, whatever you choose, but that's kind of the choice before you. And yeah, there's a lot of people who just won't allow themselves to acknowledge what is the thing that I need. So that's number one is acknowledge what you need. And if possible, act towards getting it. Like, I get it. Some people's lives are not designed where, if you got a kid to take care of, uh, you can't necessarily just drop all your responsibilities and go have a weekend away. But if you at least acknowledge what you need, you might be able to get pieces of it. Like, okay, I can't really just like drop drop what I'm doing for a weekend with the boys. But maybe if I recognize my social need is unmet, maybe I can at least call a friend for 30 minutes.
Mm.
Maybe I can get a piece of
Very
it.
good. Very good. Related to that is vacations. A lot of that is, I feel like a lot of that is definitely similar. But I'm going to start this one by mentioning for people going on vacation. One part is recognize what you want ideally from the vacation. Like I feel like you can simplify it by saying there's two types of vacations. Again, this is just my simple way of looking at it. And this actually comes from how Ashley and I have looked at trips before. Is we realize that sometimes what we want to do is go do absolutely nothing. Like, so that would be a great time to, if able to, we're going to go to like the beach or,
Mhm.
something like that. Like that's the main goal. We also realize that sometimes if we go, like there are places that if we go there, we're going to want to go see the things. So again, so we're not going to do a go see the thing trip or vacation if mentally, energetically, we want to go do nothing. So we try to
Yep.
match the two things. Um, like that's part of it. And then just one more tip. I think we might have talked about it before. Is a lot of people when they go vacations, I feel like they try to stretch them out as much as possible, which is awesome. Use the time as much as you can. But there's also there's a pretty high incidence of coming back from vacation still feeling exhausted and tired from the vacation. So a lot of people, a lot of us can really benefit from scheduling a little bit of time, like at the like in between there, just like a little buffer zone to readjust and rest a little bit without it being high stress. Like nothing
Yeah.
cuts a vacation, like nothing kind of punches you harder in the face than coming back, walking in the door at like 9 p.m. from a trip or a vacation or whatever it is, and then having to clock in at like 9 a.m. the next day. So give yourself a day or two if you can, anything like that, a half day, something to buffer your return back to normal so that your body still gets a chance to kind of like segue from that resting period.
Well, and not only that, just to generalize it up one level, stop overscheduling your vacation.
Mhm.
Like people just go to a thing and they kill themselves because they're trying to squeeze as much juice out of activities as they can. But the point of vacation is rest and rejuvenation. That's the literal point of the thing. And if the activities help with that, then terrific. But if you're not scheduling in naps and sleeping in and stuff that is rejuvenative, then you're spending an awful lot of money to take nice pictures and come back more tired than you left. Like that. That's
Man,
a terrible deal.
that is a savage way to put it, actually. That is great.
Yeah, if you want nice pictures, fucking Photoshop them. Like,
That's awesome. Oh, all right, man. Any other bullet points for the audience today?
yeah, probably about 700 because as we got about 45 minutes in, I realized I could just sit here
We could
and
go to this one so long.
yeah, I could stay on this pulpit all day, but
Yeah. We're gonna
in
part two.
service of people's time, because listening to me for 4 hours would not be rejuvenative. I'll bullet point it. So be aware of what rest looks like for you. What do you need to rejuvenate? Because Jerry mentioned he nailed a 30-minute nap before he came here. Great. If that's what rest you need, terrific. If you need to go for a run, that's restful for the mind while it expends the body. Do the rest that's going to rejuvenate the thing you need, but view it as an ability management and an energy management problem to solve. It's not just about rest. And then be honest with yourself. What's the thing that rests you? And it doesn't have to be the thing that rests me. Like, one of my clients came in and was talking about, she read a book of poetry. That sounds like the least restful thing I've ever heard of in my life, because I don't understand the art of poetry, in spite of my efforts to try. But something about that, like, I mean, just the look of relaxation that came over that person's face as they were talking about, I was like, wow, that was really restful for them. I could just tell by talking to them. So treat it as important and as a energy and ability management problem, and you'll start getting the first steps. This is a lifelong struggle, so don't imagine you're going to solve it next month.
Yeah. Awesome, brother. Well, I think we definitely opened the doors for a part 2 on this one. So we'll definitely talk about that one and when to fit that in. So as always, great time just getting on here and chatting with you. We hope you guys got some value out of this. Again, like these are released on podcast format, Asymmetric Habits. It's on Spotify podcasts and Apple Podcasts. The episodes are generally released every Wednesday morning. And so between live ones, like we always try to put these live ones up the following week. And then between those, we also have an archive of older ones we did before putting them in podcast form that get released on there as well. So you can always check it for some content. Feel free to share it, of course, for anybody that you think this will help. And meanwhile, Jonathan and I will catch all you guys here in the live format in about 2 weeks.
See y'all next time.